Hi there, Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics. Unfortunately, another tribute video, and this one is for Ace Frehley. Everyone knows Ace Frehley, who's into rock and roll music, formerly of Kiss. He was born Paul Daniel Frehley, April 27th, 1951, in the Bronx in New York City, next borough over from me in Queens, where I am. Passed away October 16th, 2025, at the age of 74 in New Jersey. Most people knew him as Ace Frehley, or the Spaceman, or the Space Ace, or just simply Ace. He was a guitar player, self-taught, never really had any lessons, couldn't read music, did it all on his own. Some people are just born with that natural aptitude, and Ace had it, and he was so influential. Besides his guitar work, which influenced millions of kids worldwide to pick up a guitar, he was also a songwriter. Yet, oddly enough, he was later known as a singer. He wrote songs for Kiss, starting with the first album, yet he didn't sing anything until the fifth album. That's when he wrote and sang, played guitar and bass on Shock Me. That was his first lead vocal in Kiss, all the way on their fifth album, Love Gun. So go figure. Guitar player, songwriter, and then a vocalist. And he gained confidence. He was never thrilled with his singing voice, and he wasn't the best singer in Kiss, but he just had something. He had this charisma about him. He was funny in interviews. Maybe he was a little, happy during certain interviews, and the Tom Snyder is a great one. I watched it the other day. Classic interview, and Ace stole the show, and Gene was very upset. So going back to the beginning a little here, in late 1972, he became the last piece of the puzzle, the last original member of Kiss, lead guitar. Late 1972. He left in late 1982, so he had a 10-year run, and then he came back after the Kiss MTV Unplugged. He was a special guest, so was Peter Criss. They joined they joined Gene and Paul on stage, and then the reunion was in full effect, so he was an ongoing member from 1996 to late 2001, early 2002, somewhere around there. He left again, and then he was a solo artist. Now, technically, he was on 10 Kiss studio records. He was pictured on the cover of another one, but he didn't even play on that record. Between 1974, the debut Kiss album, and 1981, Music from the Elder, he appeared on 10 studio albums, including also, I should say, Psycho Circus from 1998 during the reunion period. He was on a bunch of live albums as well. Of course, Alive 1 and Alive 2 are the most well-known. Some other ones, some later soundboard releases that they released from the original band. He also has 8 solo records, including the 1978 Ace Frehley album, which had it was the best-selling out of all the Kiss solo records. Widely hailed as the best. That's arguable. Some people really love the Paul Stanley solo album. But for my money, the Ace Frehley solo album from 1978 is the best of those 4 Kiss solo albums. Now, I was schooled, I'll get into my beginnings with Kiss in a moment, but I was schooled working at record stores for years by coworkers who just loved Kiss and played their stuff all the time, whether it was the live albums, the studio albums, the solo albums. I heard them all over the years. And then eventually, starting with the late 80s, I started hearing them as they were released on vinyl and then CD through the end of the Kiss career at the record store. So I've heard every Kiss album multiple times. I'm familiar with all of them. Obviously, some are better than others, and most people say the classic period is the best period. Now, when I first got into Kiss, I knew the song Beth, because back in the day when I was a little kid, that was on AM radio. That was a big hit. So I knew that song, but that wasn't a typical Kiss song. Maybe on the radio I heard Detroit Rock City, but Kiss never really struck me, except I knew the song Beth, Maybe I knew one or two other songs, but they didn't really get played. Oddly enough, for a New York band, they didn't get much airplay to my memory on FM rock radio, and I started listening in 77, as I've said in many videos I've been on YouTube talking about my history with music. 77 is when I discovered FM and became a fan of a lot of classic rock bands. But Kiss were never really played that much on New York radio that I can remember. Or if they were, they never really struck me, and the songs never really hit me, but they hit me later. Now, I remember when I got into Kiss, here's my story. It was Friday. I looked up the date. It was January 15th, 1982. I remember sneaking into the kitchen, and I think I used one of those little, like AM radio. You'd put the earplug in your ear and listen to the radio late at night under your pillow. Your parents would think you were sleeping. Or a little black and white TV in the kitchen, really tiny TV. I snuck in there to watch a TV show called Fridays. So this was Friday, January 15th, 1982, and Kiss were the musical guest. I liked this show because it was ABC TV here in America, ABC's answer to NBC's Saturday Night Live. And it was a sketch comedy show, and they always had a musical guest, and they had some really good ones over the years. But this is the first time I really saw Kiss, and they struck me. And they performed 3 songs from an album that had just come out a few months before, November of 1981, 3 songs from their concept album, which is a little bit progressive rock, not too much, but very little. And why did they release a concept record in 1981? Gene Simmons had this idea to make a movie and a record. A movie never came out. They had Bob Ezrin producing, who had produced their biggest studio album to date, Destroyer, from 1976. And I know a lot of people don't like Bob Ezrin productions, but he's one of my favorite producers. The work he did with the early Alice Cooper band was great. His work on Pink Floyd The Wall, an album I happen to love, really good, great, some might say. And he did music from The Elder. He was on a lot of drugs, unfortunately, at the time. So I think Kiss were trying to prove themselves, like, we're not a kids band, we could do serious music, but it backfired and wasn't a hit. But Music from the Elder has always been an album I've loved, but I didn't really hear the full album till years later. But I did see them on Fridays. They performed from the album The Oath, which is a really good hard rock song. They did the low-key mellow ballad, although live they rocked it up a little bit more than the studio version of World Without Heroes, Gene Simmons' lead vocal. And then they closed with I, which is a really cool song because it's very anthemic, and it's a sort of a duet because Paul Stanley takes the first verse, and then Gene Simmons takes the second verse. So they swap back and forth, and I always like bands that do that. And certain bands that I'm big fans of should have done it a little more in the past, but I won't go on that tangent right now. But the swapping of the lead vocals is really cool. And then the singing the chorus, and I watched the video of them on Fridays recently, and they had new drummer at the time, Eric Carr, because Peter Criss was out of the band, singing backing vocals too, and you hear his backing vocals. And this is live, no tapes. Maybe they had an offstage keyboard player or a pre-recorded keyboard player for World Without Heroes, because you definitely hear keyboards in the mix, but you don't see anyone except the 4 members of the band, including, of course, Ace on lead guitar for most of the songs there. And he's just rocking and rolling. This would be his last live performance with the band, January 15th, 1982, until he reunited with the band, the big surprise, MTV Unplugged, stayed with the band for a bunch of years, left for his solo career. So getting on to his solo career, 8 solo albums, starting with the 1978 self-titled album, which is a really good hard rock record. I would not call Kiss heavy metal. To me, they're a hard rock band, more in the vein of Van Halen. Even AC/DC, not really metal. Each band might flirt with metal a bit, but they're not really metal like Maiden or Priest. So, between 78, the self-titled album released under the banner, all the members did it, and 2024's 10,000 Volts, he released 8 solo albums. 2 of those are all cover albums. Because, I mean, Ace released more solo material than any other of his 3 original Kiss bandmates, but he wasn't a super prolific songwriter. So he did 2 records of covers, and my friends, I'm actually wearing their shirt today. I should give them a shout out. Underlords, the Underlords of the Overworld. So friends of mine from Midwest of America here, and I watched their tribute video that they just put out on their channel. Their YouTube channel is Underlords Universe. And the 2 brothers in the band and who work on the channel, run the channel, they had a really good conversation and a tribute to Ace Frehley. And they said that he was working on a 3rd album of covers. And these are called Origins. There's Origins Volume 1, Origins Volume 2. And he was supposedly working, according to the brothers, Underlords Universe, on Origins Volume 3. So will it see the light of day eventually? Will his family release it? We'll have to see what the estate does with it. So there might be future recordings coming from Ace Frehley. Perhaps another solo album with more songs that he loves, that built him up as a guitar player, just songs he loved from earlier in the rock and roll canon. Also, I definitely want to mention this because I remember these records, the Frehley's Comet records. There were 2 studio albums and a live EP that had 1 studio cut added on, 1987 and 1988. Some great songs on there. I bought the vinyl. I think my younger sister has it because she took a lot of my hard rock and metal records back in the day, so I don't even think I own that anymore. But that had some great songs on it. Into the Night, Rock Soldiers, Dolls, which had a cool synth line throughout it. I always liked the song Dolls, maybe a little cheesy, but I always liked that song too. So he wrote some really good songs throughout his career with Kiss and as a solo artist. Now, unfortunately, September, I'm doing this tribute a little late and I apologize for that. Last month, September of 2025, he had a fall in his home studio. And Ace was always known as sort of a clumsy guy. I don't know how he walked in those Kiss boots back in the 70s. And he used to joke about it. He'd fall on stage and the guys would go over and play with him and they would act like it was part of the routine and it was planned, when he would just fall down. Clumsy guy. Unfortunately, he fell in his home studio. And I think there may have been more than 1 fall, but it's not really 100% clear. And he was not doing well after the fall. He had a brain bleed. I think the doctors at the hospital put him in an induced coma and he wasn't getting any better. And I guess maybe as per the wishes in his will, or his wife, his family decided to take him off life support. And unfortunately, on October 16th of 2025, a couple of weeks ago, he died from his injuries sustained in the fall, unfortunately. And he was only 74 years old, which nowadays is kind of young. He had his troubles. We all have our troubles in life, whether it's this, that, or the other. We don't really need to go into that and talk about it. But he overcame that, all his struggles. And he had a more prolific solo career than his original bandmates in Kiss. It's just one of those things, and it's very sad because no one saw this coming. Certain people, you hear they're very sick, and then they eventually pass, or they stop playing because they can't do it anymore because of his health. But he just toured last year. He released a new studio record. He was working on the 3rd Origins CD. And now, unfortunately, Paul Frehley, better known as Ace, is no longer with us. It's very sad. He was very funny. He was self-deprecating, beat his struggles, yet he knew his worth. He's quoted as saying he never took a guitar lesson, he couldn't read music. He couldn't read music, yet he knew, for all his comedy, for all his humor, that he was one of the most influential guitar players ever. Basically because he caused kids to pick up guitars and form bands in the 70s. Because Kiss was so popular with younger kids. Somehow that passed me by, but I know from listening to all the tributes how influential he was. And Kiss were always a very big band. They had their detractors. Not everyone likes every band. You can't like every band. But there was something about Kiss. They were sort of the people's band. And I know they had all that crazy merch and people look down on that. They say, oh, Gene and Paul, they were in it for the money. But they kept making good music. And Ace kept making a lot of solo records. I know the last one didn't get the best reviews. I haven't heard it, so I can't comment on it. But I just want to say rest in peace, Spaceman. And my condolences to Ace's family, definitely. His friends, all the fellow musicians he played with, and his fans worldwide. So rest in peace, Ace, and thank you for all the music. I'm Davey Cretin for Cretin Classics. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.